Before I introduce our Phillip Yam, I'd like to first thank my fellow organizers of this conference, Brooke, Franklin, Joe Bonner. When we first talked about this, we never imagined it would be so successful, so interesting. We announced it on a Monday. By Wednesday, we had 200 people registered and 150 people, live streamed. We had to close the registration, and I was a little concerned because it's right after Labor Day, and people extend their vacations and doing things and going back to work seriously. So I'm just very pleased everyone, this came together so well, and the panels were great, and it was just a great day. Thanks. Anyway, so I said we should have a final speaker to make concluding remarks, and I thought Phillip Yam would be great. Phillip is a science editor and a writer. He is currently the editor-in-chief of the website of the Simons Foundation, where he's leading a redesign of the site and developing new kinds of content for it. I know whenever someone comes to a job, they said, redesign the website. Okay. He spent two decades at Scientific American, a magazine, where he served as a writer, features editor, news editor, and online managing editor. He is the author of the well-received book, The Pathological Protein, Mad Cow, Chronic Wasting, and Other Deadly Prion Diseases, and contributed to the 2005 Field Guide for Science Writers. He is currently on the board of the National Association of Science Writers and is the president of the New York chapter of the Asian American Journalists Association.
Great, thanks a lot, David. Really appreciate the remarks. On behalf of NASW, I'd like to thank Brooke, Katie, David, Joe, and Frank for organizing this event and for attending, for all you attendees, and as well as the moderators and the speaker. It's been really fantastic. After 7 hours of talks and conferences, I'm sure you probably just want me to say the bar is now open, but please bear with me. I'll be done in about 10 minutes. So, I wanted to start by saying, science and I've been taking notes throughout the day and kind of synthesizing what's been discussed, and I've kind of come down to like 3 main points. Certainly, as science and journalists, we're both truth seekers, and I think the conference has proved really successful in part because we were concerned about the path that the administration was taking and the new political reality. I think somehow 2017 became 1984. So so after listening to all these talks, as I mentioned, it just felt like there are 3 main themes that echo throughout, and I've kind of created little buckets for them. And in thinking about them and thinking about all the things that everyone had to say, I'm actually pretty optimistic about the future of both science and journalism in our society. The first big bucket commonality was that, history shows that what we're going through is nothing new. We've been through this all before, and we've survived so far. Carl Zimmer started the whole conference with a wonderful keynote talking about Lysenkoism and how that compromised Soviet science and journalism and made people fear getting the truth out. But there are plenty of other forces out there affecting the way we do our jobs, both as scientists and journalists, the changing business models and digital platforms, for instance. So the current politics, of course, just kind of add more to the challenges there. But in a way, as one of the panelists said, this is just another administration we just have to learn how to deal with. And I think, as David Sassoon mentioned, propaganda is an old American art and has roots dating back to World War I. And it's just kind of reached a new level now. But I think in the last panel, as Apoorva mentioned, we should think about the long game, and we'll survive this. The second common thread that seemed to percolate throughout the conference was that we should emphasize facts and do solid reporting about data. The credibility gap is one of the most destructive to science and journalism. I think a Gallup poll, polls, since just the Gallup poll finds, journalists are one of the least credible people to Americans. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, nurses came up as on the top. Scientists are also fairly high, but journalists for sure are near the bottom. And how do you close this gap? And I think in the discussions that we've had here, it seems clear that we should focus on the facts. Dan Fagan earlier today said when don't pitch story first, look at the facts and find the story after that. That prevents you from creating facts that fit your narrative, a preferred narrative. We're also now more in the fact-checking business than we ever have been before, and I think that's a really good thing. You can create your own, because right now you can create your own world with the way social media works today. We talked about some of the tools and that individual journalists can use. The need possibly to how to use FOIAs, and really being smart about that. Being smart about how to use get the information you need. Focus your FOIA. Be friends with the FOIA officials. All great advice. All ways to get more facts and data. And one thing that I also thought was very interesting was that we need to communicate the process of science, that science is a provisional endeavor, that it's subject to change, and perhaps that's one area that we really need to get the public to understand so that they don't get frustrated when they see some difference of opinion, scientific finding later on. The third commonality is really kind of my all-purpose bucket, I think. Stay adaptable but true to the principles of journalism and the truth-telling in general. We heard about the staffs of different organizations, how they've had to adjust things after the administration, but that has been going on forever in the media business. We have to adapt to our audience and their audience needs and the changing digital platforms. We should think of ourselves as circulation managers, Carl said earlier, and that's the idea is to build audience, to understand and experiment with new forms of storytelling to reach new audiences, and really also to understand how audiences consume information, including the fact that some of the audience maybe we assume know too much or more than we give them credit for or not enough credit for. Our job as journalists is to check those with power, and that's the fundamental mission of journalism in this democracy. So Heather mentioned at the end, which I thought is a good way of summarizing that, go out and report and don't stay at your desk. In thinking about all of the information that came out today, it really kind of boils down to the free flow of information and the ways that flow can be manipulated. I was astonished that we live at a time when the process of science can create wonderful medical and technical breakthroughs, but yet at the same time, the same process cannot be trusted when it comes to predictions about climate change. Certainly, climate change was a major feature of this conference. And a key aspect to the free flow of information lies in the diversity in the media, diversity in the news. We all know the value of having multiple sources in order to create an accurate story within an honest context. Yet diversity remains a challenge in the newsroom, despite best efforts over the years. The latest survey by the American Society of Newspaper Editors finds that only 17% of the newsroom, minority journalists make up only 17% of the newsroom, women about a third. That's well below, of course, the representation of the United States as a whole. Believe it or not, though, those numbers are actually an improvement. But it just shows you that some efforts have worked, but there's still a long way to go. I think Sarah Chaussam earlier today also touched on this when she said that you should resist the temptation to put the scientist on a pedestal of objectivity. She talked about how the land grant process skewed, or not skewed, but kind of defined agricultural research. So the scientists did work in that, with that in mind. So we can produce science through that particular lens. So the kind of science you do depends on the kinds of questions you ask and the questions depend on who's asking them. So diverse voices in this case, I think, is essential. Unfortunately, the word diversity in some circles brings to mind, means to them preferential treatment, or as a way, or somehow it's a net that you cast wide in order to bring unqualified people up. The current administration, I think, has done a lot, in particular, to give voice to these fears and beliefs. You know, you can just think about the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and the constant bashing of the Obama presidency. I was talking to a former NBC News producer who's African American, and she was saying words that made me really think hard about it. She told me that, you know, if the 8 years of the Obama administration weren't great for African Americans, when was it? And it really goes to show you that the slogan, "Make America Great Again," is what, as political pundits call, a dog whistle to the extreme right. This is not an inclusive call. This is not about building a future for all. And I think that's where we all come in as scientists and as journalists. That's why a free press is so crucial. By looking at the real facts, by being diligent in your reporting and dogged in your research, you'll be able to tell a real truth. Because stories you create go beyond the embargoes, the deadlines, and the Facebook shares. It goes to the very heart of our democracy and who we are as a nation. So thanks a lot. I guess it's safe to say the bar is open.